you definitely don't want to miss. Despite his relatively small physical stature compared to most of the world's powerful fighters, Luffy has developed significant physical strength to match them. A notable example of this strength was on Dressrosa when he used his foot to block a stomp by Don Quixote do Flamingo, a man nearly twice his height with the immense physical power of his own. Earlier that day, he even effortlessly flipped over the massive gladiator Spartan, defeating him as well. With constantly improving skill in battle combined with his almost unbreakable willpower, Luffy has found ways to defeat increasingly powerful opponents that have come in his path, all while having been out at sea for less than a year. Goma Goma no Mi enables all parts of Luffy's body to behave like rubber, meaning that certain actions that otherwise would be impossible to do with a normal human body can be achieved through the ability for extra speed or power. Furthermore, thanks to rubber's natural insulating properties, he's also immune to electrical attacks, such as those from the Goro Goro no Mi, Electro, and Zeus. Luffy has shown a limited ability to move in midair by grabbing onto something with an extended limb and pulling himself away from what could have been a fatal attack. This gives him the option of several jumping and airborne attacks that would have been disadvantageous to most other people. Luffy can also use his stretching abilities to inhale a great amount of air to exhale a big gust of wind. This application of his powers was used to blow away Marigold's poisonous vapor from her venom spit, and Magellan's poison breath. Afro Luffy. During the Long Ring Long Land arc, Luffy had to face Foxy the Silver Fox in the final event, Combat. Usopp, who was with him, spotted a big black afro and had Luffy wear it. Thus, Afro Luffy was born. Usopp claims that the afro gives Luffy extra power. While wearing the afro, Luffy also tends to say things such as "hell yeah," although only Nami.
This is the funniest game I've ever played!
Cat poop. Ew, that's disgusting. I think I should write...
Me and possibly Zoro think that it doesn't help anything. The others say because of the afro is how he gets more powerful, but they're probably just joking or playing along. Although this form appears once in the original manga, Afro Luffy returns again in a filler episode. When Foxy tries to get his ship and crew back, he's forced to ask for Luffy's help. When doing so, he hands over the afro he had before, and Luffy uses it to fight. There are 6 more incredible transformations to cover, so let's continue with Gear 2 Luffy. Gear 2 is a transformation technique that was first seen in Luffy's fight against Bueno. It instantly enhanced Luffy's strength, speed, and mobility. Prior to the time skip, Luffy would initiate this technique by using his leg as a pump to increase the blood flow in all of his body parts. As a result, all of his body parts became stronger and faster. He's been able to heavily damage some of the strongest individuals in the series while this technique was active, such as Magellan and Blackbeard. When this technique was in effect, his entire metabolic rate went so high that his sweat vaporized rapidly, making his body look as if it were steaming. In the anime, his entire skin turns slightly pink and shiny from the increased blood flow. At first, Luffy could only use Gear 2 for a short period of time, because the accelerated speed at which nutrients are used up depletes his body rapidly. Having a faster blood flow is useless if there's no nutrients. Thus, this enhancement also means reduced strength and agility after prolonged use. Due to this, as pointed out by Rob Lucy, Gear 2 hacks away at Luffy's life force dramatically, increasing a chance at having a much shorter lifespan because he's starving his body, though Luffy rebukes it, saying that it doesn't matter as long as he saves his friends. After Gear 2 wears off, Luffy can recover quickly by replenishing his body's nutrients by eating meat. Later in the Impel Down arc, Luffy demonstrated a more excessive use of his Gear 2 ability, being able to activate it at conveniently brief periods of time to save his stamina and strength reserves for longer fights. This is possibly because of Luffy's mastery over the form, along with his desire to save Ace, and possibly a large amount of food he ate in New Common Land at Impel Down. After the time skip, it appears that Luffy's refined his control over this technique, as he's now been shown capable of activating it by swiftly pumping blood from any of his limbs without having to assume his original stance. Luffy's refinement of Gear 2 led him to using the ability in short, controlled bursts, activating it briefly in order to use individual ability-specific attacks. With this new mastery over Gear 2, combined with Busoshoku Haki, he can now easily destroy a pacifista and take down a fishman as large as Watatsumi with a single Gomu Gomu no Jet pistol. Furthermore, using a combination of Haki and Gear 2, Luffy is able to punch his opponents with such speed and force that it causes his fist to ignite, bearing a similar effect to his brother's signature attack, which is called Red Hawk. Gear 3 Luffy. Gear 3 is a transformation technique that is hinted at during the climax of the fight between Luffy and Bluno. By blowing a massive amount of air into his thumb, Luffy can inflate the bones of a particular body part, making it gigantic. These inflated body parts are capable of inflicting damage on a massive scale, being able to break through walls and large structures with ease. Before the time skip, while in Gear 3, it was quite difficult for Luffy to move while using this technique, making the gear not the best option to use against fast opponents. This is why, since his battle against Rob Lucy, Luffy tends to only activate Gear 3 only against massive and often slow-moving targets, whom he likes to assault from high above in midair. After the time skip, Luffy seems to have obtained better skills at utilizing Gear 3. After 2 years, Luffy can seemingly control where the air is stored within his limbs. This allows the majority of Luffy's arm to remain as it is, permitting him to stretch it, thus allowing him to attack and withdraw much faster than pre-time skip. He managed to enlarge his right fist while inside a Yarukiman bubble when engaging Kraken, demonstrating the use of infusing Busoshoku Haki into his colossal-sized arm to enforce its durability and defeat the sea monster. Luffy is confirmed to have overcome his weakness of shrinking when deactivating this gear. After inflating both his arms and using Goma Goma no Elephant Gatling on Noah for a prolonged period of time, he didn't turn into his chibi form. Nightmare Luffy. Before his fight against Gecko Maria and Oars during the Thriller Bark arc, the Rolling Pirates helped Luffy become temporarily stronger by infusing him with the power of 100 shadows that were separated from their owners by Maria's use of the Kage Kage no Mi. This enabled Luffy to become Nightmare Luffy. With Luffy's strong spirit, he was able to contain 100 shadows within him when most normal people could only contain 2 or 3. In this form, Luffy was several times bigger than his normal self and his skin turned completely blue. He was roughly the same size as Maria and his body was similar to Chopper's post-time skip heavy point. Luffy also talked differently, losing his usual carefree tone and instead speaking with grim seriousness. By being further augmented by the 100 shadows, all of his normal techniques are further increased, enough to topple even Oars. While in this form, Luffy was capable of using the combined strength and skills of the shadows within him. With this strength, Luffy was even capable of stopping a giant Goma Goma no rifle attack delivered by Oars with one hand, and delivering massive attacks onto the zombie behemoth. Because one of the shadows belonged to a swordsman, Luffy also gained the ability to fight with swords, something he never knew before. He also appears to be able to move at incredible speed, having safely snatched up both Nami and Usopp away from a rampaging Oars, and it was only when Luffy made his presence known did Oars and Maria learn about it. In Unlimited Cruise, Nightmare Luffy also demonstrated archery skills and could shoot fireballs from his mouth after drinking sake. This form, however, only lasted for 10 minutes. After that, all of the shadows within Luffy returned to their original owners. Gear 4 Luffy. Gear 4 is a transformation technique first seen in Luffy's battle against Don Quixote do Flamingo. It was developed by Luffy during his training on Rusukaina and has 3 different forms. First form, Bound Man. In this form, Luffy's proportions become warped and his body becomes much larger in size, with his arms, upper torso, and legs coated in Busoshoku Haki. As a side effect, he's incapable of standing still on the ground, and instead constantly bounds on the spot. This form was created in order.
My place is Australian for smart home because using it is almost too easy, mate.
In order to combat many powerful and large animals on Rusukaina. It possesses both high-speed movement reminiscent of Soru and the ability to kick off the air, similar to Geppo. These moves are cleverly adapted to work with his body's elasticity. It allows Luffy to not only bound off the air, but also make the attacks bounce off his own body. After Boundman lands on the ground after using an attack, Luffy can't seem to control his landing and bounces like a ball in a comical fashion until he either loses momentum, or he somehow regains control and starts flying again. Though he has some heightened resistance to cutting attacks in this form, if an opponent using a bladed weapon has Busoshoku Haki of comparable or greater strength to Luffy's own, they'll be able to cut through his coated arms with relative ease. Similarly, his near immunity to blunt force attacks is also not absolute. This was seen when Luffy attacked Kaido, and the latter counter-attacked with his Karabo. Instead of bouncing, Luffy was sent flying and rendered unconscious by a single hit. Tank Man. During his battle with Charlotte Cracker, Luffy revealed another form of Gear 4 known as Tank Man. Currently, the base form of Tank Man is unknown, since the only time it's been used was after Luffy ate Cracker's biscuits to the point where he was completely full and used his Manpuku version form. Due to the increase in Luffy's metabolism Gear 4 causes, he's able to leave his Tank Man form in a short time after using it. This is the case when Luffy was able to burn off the massive amount of biscuits he'd eaten in his fight with Cracker shortly after he defeated the Sweet Commander. In this form, Luffy's arms inflate slightly while most of the air appears to fill his torso. Luffy's durability rises sharply in this form, as he was capable of tanking and deflecting a piercing strike from Charlotte Cracker, whereas previously, Cracker was able to cut deeply into Luffy's arm when Luffy was in Bound Man, Snake Man. During his battle with Charlotte Katakuri, Luffy revealed another form of Gear 4 known as Snake Man. Unlike his other two Gear 4 forms, Luffy does not significantly expand, with his forearms, legs, and upper torso being only slightly enlarged and the rest of his body retaining its normal proportions. Instead of steam, this form produces a gaseous substance appearing as a mix of steam and fire. His fists also flex differently, with the first knuckles being extended, similar to a leopard fist. In this form, Luffy gains a significant increase in speed and the ability to use Python to change the direction of his attacks. However, Snake Man allows his attacks to continuously accelerate the longer they last, allowing Luffy not only to press an attack more fiercely on an opponent capable of dodging, but also to increase the attack's speed and power until he finally lands the hit. It also gives him the opportunity to attack any area of an opponent with ease. This form focuses on dealing with agile opponents, who specialize in dodging and requires Luffy's recently heightened proficiency in Kenbun Shokuhaki in order to make his punches into semi-homing attacks. Since his body's lack of inflation, Luffy's defense is considerably worse compared to his Bound Man and Tank Man forms. When he was thrown into structures by Katakuri, he took the impact like he normally would, as opposed to bouncing as he does in Bound Man. Additionally, he receives blunt attacks as he does normally, rather than having them bounce off of him. We'll soon cover Luffy's mystery form, but let's first explain his fifth gear, model Nika Sun God. Gear 5 was created during the battle on Onigashima, as a result of Luffy awakening his Devil Fruit. In this state, Luffy's heartbeat takes on a musical rhythm which has been described by Zunesha as the drums of liberation. His hair and clothes turn white, his eyes glow with white ring-like pupils, and white clouds float around his neck. This is similar to the clouds of steam that accompany him in Gear 4. The amount of Haki released from this form was enough that it could be felt all the way to the live floor in the Skull Dome. Aligning with the mythical Zoan nature of this new form, Luffy's already rubbery body gains strength, freedom, and durability that surpasses what he would receive from his previous forms to the point that it's now even cartoonishly malleable. There are a few examples of this. One of them is when Luffy took a hit to the head from Kaido's Hasaikai and instead of being injured, his head wrapped around the weapon. Another example is when Kaido smashed him into the ground and his body squished and later returned to its normal shape. Luffy is able to utilize both the limb inflation in Gear 3 and the muscle inflation in Gear 4 without the need to pump air into his body first. He was able to increase his arm to an enormous size in order to grab Kaido's transformed body, and could easily manhandle Kaido despite his enormous size, swinging him from side to side. Luffy can also perform the inflation over his entire body at once, transforming himself into a giant of massive size. Luffy can also extend his rubbery nature to the environment around him, as seen when he stretched a section of the roof and used it to send Kaido's attack back at him. This power also seems to be able to affect organic material as well, as shown when Kaido literally swallowed Luffy whole and then proceeded to have his body expand and inflate along with Luffy's. He's even demonstrated that he's able to apply this effect on an intangible matter such as lightning. Despite the strength of this form, due to inexperience, it consumes plenty of energy to maintain and use. This leads to Luffy being visibly aged once de-transformed, and also experiences a high amount of fatigue. With that said, Luffy can transform back by seemingly forcing his heart to beat into the rhythm of the drums of liberation. Despite all the enhancements, Luffy is still vulnerable to cutting attacks, even in this form, Pirate King Luffy. Although there will surely be a lot more interesting things unraveling in the manga, we can now account for Luffy currently having the following abilities: Gear 2, Gear 3, Observation Haki, Armament Haki, Conqueror's Haki, Gear 4, Advanced Observation Haki, Ryo, Advanced Conquerors, and Gear 5. It's safe to say that he's extremely powerful and skilled, especially when you consider the fact that based on in-universe time, Luffy is only 19 years old. The next logical step for him would be to find a way to fully perfect his use of Advanced Conquerors as well as his Gear 5th form. Luffy is now able to go against the likes of Kaido simply using the little knowledge of Ryo and Advanced Conquerors he has. Luffy as the Pirate King should be able to have complete mastery over Future Sight, which would make any solid opponent physically unable to touch him because he just predict their moves. His use of Future Sight or Advanced Observation Haki will probably be as good as Katakuri's was during their battle on Whole Cake Island. Luffy by the end of the series will probably stop using his Gear 4th forms because of his new arsenal of abilities and awakening of Gear 5th. The introduction in Gear 5th, which seems to take inspiration from early cartoons like Popeye, and the Gorosei hyping the fruit's ability as only being limited by Luffy's creativity, is why he could potentially start transforming his body into objects and vehicles in order to do anything he desires. One of Luffy's major issues, ever since the start of the time skip, has been the drawbacks of him using heavy amounts of haki, and while he's been able to survive in spite of this, the challenges ahead seem more deadly with the likes of World Government, Teach, and possibly even Shanks waiting for him. He will need to learn how to sustain his haki more, and if not, he might lose his friends, family, and even his nakama. Losses like this might lead him to breaking down even more than he did at the end of the Marineford and becoming way more serious than his usual fun and adventurous personality. It's certain that by the end of the series, Luffy is going to become the king of pirates, so his expected bounty by the end of the series should be around 6 billion bellies, which is almost 500 million more than the previous pirate king Gold Leaf Roger, and 3 billion more than he's currently worth in the manga.
Bega, Australia's most loved cheese.
Today we'll be explaining all